narrow back alleys around Bradford's University were sealed off tonight as police made a detailed search of the area. The body was found by a patrolling officer, well hidden behind a low stone wall at the back of a large terraced house in the city's Bedsit area. Police believe it may have lain unnoticed there since Saturday. Ripper Squad detectives from both Yorkshire and Manchester were quickly called to the scene. And tonight, the Home Office pathologist who's dealt with all 11 Ripper victims, Professor David G., was carrying out an examination of the body. Although detectives say it's still too early to connect the death with the Ripper, he has already killed 2 women in this central area of Bradford and attacked one other. And I understand there are similarities in the way that this woman has died. In fact, police forces throughout the north had been making special preparations following the tape-recorded message from the man they believed to be the Ripper, in which he'd warned that he might strike again in September or October. But despite the tape and 4 letters received from the man they think they're looking for, detectives have so far got little nearer to revealing the identity of the man who's terrorized the red light districts of northern cities over the past 4 years. Tonight, they're waiting anxiously to find out if he has slipped their neck once more and struck again.
Peter William Sutcliffe, also known as Peter Coonan, was an English serial killer who was dubbed the Yorkshire Ripper, an allusion to Jack the Ripper by the press. On 22nd of May 1981, he was found guilty of murdering 13 women and attempting to murder 7 others between 1975 and 1980. Peter Sutcliffe was born to a working-class family in Bingley, West Riding of Yorkshire, and was raised Catholic. His parents were John William Sutcliffe and his wife, Kathleen Frances née Coonan. Reportedly a loner, Sutcliffe left school aged 15 and had a series of menial jobs, including 2 stints as a grave digger in the 1960s. Between November 1971 and April 1973, he worked at the Baird television factory on a packaging line. He left this position when he was asked to go on the road as a salesman. After leaving Baird Television, Sutcliffe worked night shifts at the Britannia Works of Anderton International from April 1973. In February 75, he took redundancy and used half of the £400 payoff to train as a heavy goods driver. On March 1976, Sutcliffe was dismissed for the theft of used tyres. He was unemployed until October 76, where he found a job as an HGV driver for T&WH Clark Holdings Limited in Bradford. Sutcliffe, by some reports, hired sex workers as a young man, and it has been speculated that he had a bad experience during which he was conned out of money by a prostitute and her pimp. Other analysis of his actions have not found evidence that he actually sought the services of sex workers, but note that he nonetheless developed an obsession with them, including watching them soliciting on the streets of Leeds and Bradford. Sonia Suma met Sutcliffe on 14th of February 1967. They married on 10th of August 1974. Sonia suffered several miscarriages, and they were informed that she would not be able to have children. Through his childhood and early adolescence, Sutcliffe showed no signs of abnormality, but one of his brothers admitted that their father was an abusive alcoholic, stating that their father once smashed a beer glass over Peter's head for sitting in his chair at the Christmas table after arguing, when the brother was 4 or 5 years old. Their father used to whip them with a belt. Later, in part related to his occupation as a gravedigger, he developed a macabre sense of humor. In his late adolescence, Sutcliffe developed a growing obsession with voyeurism and spent much time spying on prostitutes and the men seeking their services. Sutcliffe's first documented assault was of a female prostitute whom he had met while searching for another woman who had tricked him out of money. He left his friend's minivan and walked up St. Paul's Road in Bradford until he was out of sight. When he returned, he was out of breath as if he had been running. Sutcliffe said he had followed a sex worker into a garage and hit her over the head with a stone in a sock. According to Sutcliffe, "I got out of the car, went across the road and hit her. The force of the impact tore the toe off the sock, and whatever was it came out. I went back to the car and got in it." Police visited Sutcliffe's home the next day, as the woman he had attacked had noted the vehicle registration plate. He admitted he had hit her, but claimed it was with his hand. The police told him he was very lucky, as the woman did not want anything more to do with the incident. In 1975, Sutcliffe committed his second assault on the night of 5th of July in Cayley. He attacked Anna Rogulski, who was walking alone, striking her unconscious with a ball-peen hammer and slashing her stomach with a knife. Disturbed by a neighbor, he left without killing her. She survived after neurological surgery, but was psychologically traumatized by the attack. On the night of 15th of August, Sutcliffe attacked Olive Smelt in Halifax. Enjoying the same modus operandi, he briefly engaged Smelt with a commonplace pleasantry about the weather before striking hammer blows to her skull from behind. He then disarranged her clothing and slashed her lower back with a knife. Again he was interrupted and left his victim badly injured but alive. The first victim to be killed by Sutcliffe was Wilma McCann on the 30th of October. McCann, from Leeds, was the mother of 4 children. Sutcliffe struck the back of her skull twice with a hammer, then inflicted a stab wound to the throat, 2 stab wounds below the right breast, 3 stab wounds below the right breast, and a series of 9 stab wounds around the umbilicus. Sutcliffe committed his next murder in Leeds in January 76, when he stabbed 42-year-old Emily Jackson 52 times. He stamped on her thigh, leaving behind the impression of his boot. Sutcliffe attacked 20-year-old Marcella Claxton in Leeds on 9th of May. Walking home from a party, she accepted the offer of a lift from Sutcliffe. When she got out of the car to urinate, he hit her from behind with a hammer. She required extensive multiple brain operations and suffered from blackouts and chronic depression. On the 5th of February 1977, Sutcliffe attacked Irene Richardson. Richardson was bludgeoned to death with a hammer. Once she was dead, he mutilated her corpse with a knife. 2 months later, on 23rd of April, he killed Patricia Atkinson in Bradford, in her flat where police found a boot print on the bedclothes. Another 2 months later, on 26th of June, he murdered 16-year-old Jane MacDonald in Chapeltown. She was not a sex worker, and in the public perception, her murder showed that all women were potential victims. A witness misidentified the make of his car, resulting in more than 300 police officers checking thousands of cars without success. On 1st of October 1977, Sutcliffe murdered Jean Jordan in Manchester. In a confession, Sutcliffe said he realized the new £5 note he had left with her was traceable. On 9th of October, Jordan's body was discovered by local dairy worker and future actor Bruce Jones. The £5 note, hidden in a secret compartment in Jordan's handbag, was traced to branches of the Midland Bank in Shipley and Bingley. Police analysis narrowed the field to 8,000 employees who could have received it in their wage packet. Over 3 months, the police interviewed 5,000 men, including Sutcliffe. but Sutcliffe gave a suitable alibi. On 14th of December, Sutcliffe attacked Marilyn Moore, another prostitute from Leeds. She survived and provided the police with a description of her attacker. Sutcliffe again was interviewed on this issue. In 1978, the police continued their search for the person who received the £5 note. That month, Sutcliffe killed again. His victim was Yvonne Pearson, a 21-year-old prostitute from Bradford. He repeatedly bludgeoned her about the head with his hammer, then jumped on her chest before stuffing horsehair into her mouth. 10 days later, he killed Helen Reitker, an 18-year-old from Huddersfield. He struck her 5 times as she exited his vehicle, before stripping her and stabbing her repeatedly in the chest. The urge to kill girls in Sutcliffe was now practically uncontrollable. On 16th of May, he killed Vera Millward in an attack in the car park of the Manchester Royal Infirmary. 4th of April, he killed Josephine Whittaker, a 19-year-old building society clerk. Meanwhile, a tape message purporting to be from the murderer, taunting Assistant Chief Constable George Oldfield of the West Yorkshire Police, was released to the media.
I'm Jack. I see you are still having no luck catching me. I have the greatest respect for you, George, but Lord, you are no nearer catching me now than 4 years ago when I started. I reckon your boys are letting you down, George. They can't be much good, can they? The only time they came near catching me was a few months back in Chapeltown, when I was disturbed. I warned you in March that I'd strike again. Sorry it wasn't Bradford. I'm not quite sure when I'll strike again, but it will be definitely sometime this year. I'm not sure where. Maybe Manchester. I like it there. There's plenty of them knocking about. They never learn, do they, George? I bet you've warned them, but they never listen. Well, it's been nice chatting to you, George. Yours, Jack the Ripper.
Based on the recorded message, police began searching for a man with a Wearside accent and narrowed it down to the Castletown area of Sunderland, Tyne and Wear. The hoaxer, dubbed Wearside Jack, also sent 2 letters to police and the Daily Mirror boasting of his crimes. Both letters were signed Jack the Ripper. The hoaxer case was reopened in 2005 and DNA identified John Samuel Humble, an unemployed alcoholic and longtime resident of Sunderland. Humble was charged with attempting to pervert the course of justice and was convicted to 8 years in prison. He died in July 2019, age 63. On the 1st of September, Sutcliffe murdered 20-year-old Barbara Leach, a Bradford University student. Her body was dumped at the rear of 13 Ashgrove under a pile of bricks, close to the university and her lodgings. It was his 16th attack. The murder of a woman who was not a sex worker again alarmed the police and prompted an expensive publicity campaign emphasizing the Wearside connection. Despite the false lead, Sutcliffe was interviewed on at least 2 other occasions in 1979. Despite matching several forensic clues and being on the list of 300 names in connection with the £5 note, he was not strongly suspected. Sutcliffe was interviewed by police 9 times in total. In April 1980, Sutcliffe was arrested for drunk driving. While awaiting trial, he killed 2 more women. Sutcliffe murdered 47-year-old Marguerite Walls on the night of the 20th of August 1980, and 20-year-old Jacqueline Hill, a student at Leeds University, on the night of 17th of November 1980. Hill's body was found on wasteland. He also attacked 3 other women who survived. Ufeda Bandara in Leeds on 24th of September 1980. Maureen Lear, known as Mo, an art student, attacked at Leeds University on 25th of October 1980. And 16-year-old Teresa Sykes, attacked in Huddersfield on the night of 5th of November 1980. Needing to feel safe, Sykes placed a wardrobe and dressing table against her bedroom door and slept with a knife hidden under her pillow. On the 25th of November 1980, Trevor Birdsall, an associate of Sutcliffe, and the getaway driver as Sutcliffe had fled his first documented assault in 1969, reported him to the police as a suspect, but the information vanished into the paperwork already accumulated. On the 2nd of January 1981, Sutcliffe was stopped by the police with a 24-year-old prostitute, Olivia Reivers, in the driveway of the Light Trades house in Melbourne Avenue, Broomhill, Sheffield. A police check by probationary constable Robert Hydes revealed Sutcliffe's car had false number plates, and he was arrested and transferred to Dewsbury Police Station. At Dewsbury, he was questioned in relation to the Yorkshire Ripper case, as he matched many of the known physical characteristics. The next day, police returned to the scene of the arrest and discovered a knife, hammer, and rope he had discarded when he briefly slipped away from the police after telling them he was bursting for a pee. Sutcliffe hid a second knife in the toilet cistern at the police station when he was permitted to use the toilet. The police obtained a search warrant for his home in Heaton and brought his wife in for questioning.
Sutcliffe's last victim was a 19-year-old student at Leeds University, Jacqueline Hill. Her death led to the setting up of a new super squad of top detectives, desperate to catch a man who seemed to defy every known detection technique. In fact, Sutcliffe had been amazingly lucky. Perhaps the strongest clue he left behind was the new £5 note he'd given to a prostitute he'd killed in Manchester.
They thought they'd got him. I mean, one lad said to me, he said, well, you know, we think this is him, and took him away. Peter came back about 5 o'clock, because we asked him what happened. They said that they'd interviewed him further, questioning him his whereabouts and what he did, and they took some of his clothes away for forensic tests, and they gave him a saliva test as well. It used to be a joke that he was nicknamed the Ripper, and he used to answer to that sometimes. So it was, it's rather sort of a bit sad now, isn't it?
By the end of the inquiry, the incident room in Leeds was crammed full of facts and information connected with the case, but none of it, sadly, led to Sutcliffe. 250,000 names were individually filed on cards. More than 30,000 statements were taken. The strain on manpower and resources was immense. Police from forces all over the north saturated the red light areas where prostitutes operated and sent in millions of car numbers for storage on computers. Sutcliffe's car alone was spotted 60 times. After 3 separate sightings, he was taken in for questioning. That meant he'd been interviewed 9 times by the police. But always he was either loosely alibied by his wife Sonia, or he had some equally plausible excuse. But perhaps the main reason he got away with it for so long was because the police leading the hunt put great emphasis on a tape recording they'd received.
I'm Jack. I see you are still having no luck catching me. I have the greatest respect for you, George. But Lord, you are no nearer catching me now than 4 years ago when I started.
The tape, with its strong northeast accent, was of course, as we now know, a hoax, and it sent everybody off looking for clues in quite the wrong direction.
They can't be much good, can they?
Sutcliffe's friend Trevor Birdsall, who'd long suspected that Sutcliffe might be the Ripper, says he discounted the idea just because his friend hadn't got a Geordie accent. In the end, Sutcliffe was caught quite by chance. He'd put false number plates on his car to go out once more looking for a prostitute to kill. When the plates were checked and the police finally found some of his weapons, he confessed. Once he'd admitted he was the Yorkshire Ripper, Sutcliffe took over 15 hours to tell the police the rest of his story. A story of 13 killings, 7 ferocious attacks, and a gruesome game of hide-and-seek with the police that lasted for 6 long and terrifying years.
After 2 days of extensive questioning, Sutcliffe suddenly declared he was the Ripper. Over the next day, he calmly described his many attacks. Weeks later, he claimed that God had told him to murder the women. The women I killed were filth, he told police. Bastard prostitutes who were littering the streets. I was just cleaning the place up a bit. Sutcliffe was charged on 5th of January 1981.
Yes, absolutely delighted. Yes.
At his trial, he pleaded not guilty to 13 charges of murder, but guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. The basis of his defense was that he claimed to be the tool of God's will. Sutcliffe said he heard voices that ordered him to kill sex workers whilst working as a gravedigger, which he claimed originated from the headstone of a Polish man, Bronislaw Zapolski, and that the voices were that of God. He pleaded guilty to 7 charges of attempted murder. The prosecution intended to accept Sutcliffe's plea after 4 psychiatrists diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia, but the trial judge, Justice Sir Leslie Boreham, demanded an unusually detailed explanation of the prosecution reasoning. The judge finally rejected the diminished responsibility plea and insisted that the case would be dealt with by a jury. The trial was set to commence on the 5th of May 1981. Lasting 2 weeks, and despite the efforts of his counsel, Sutcliffe was found guilty of murder on all counts and sentenced to 20 concurrent sentences of life imprisonment.
Imprisonment, with a recommendation that he should not be released for at least 30 years, said it was difficult to find words adequate to describe the brutality and gravity of the offences. Outside the court, crowds waited at the end of the 3-week hearing. Mrs. Beryl Leach, whose daughter Barbara was killed by Sutcliffe, said the case had created bonds between all those parents and relatives who had attended the court. With the relatives was Olive Smelt, a survivor of one of the Ripper's attacks. And another parent, Mrs. Doreen Hill, whose daughter Jacqueline was Sutcliffe's last victim. From the Old Bailey, this report by Jeremy Thompson.
Just before 3:30 this afternoon, the jury were recalled only to tell the judge that they could not reach a unanimous verdict. In that case, he advised them he could accept a majority decision. 50 minutes later, the 6 men and 6 women of the jury filed quietly back into court number 1. They'd been out for just under 6 hours. The clerk of the court began to read out the charges. First was the death of Wilma McCann. Do you, he asked the jury, find Peter William Sutcliffe guilty of murder or guilty of manslaughter? In a firm, clear voice, the foreman of the jury replied, we find him guilty of murder. 10 of them had agreed, he said. 2 dissented. Sutcliffe, closely guarded by 5 prison officers, moved restlessly at the dock rail. In the press benches and public gallery above, there was a stir but no noise. Olive Smelt, a surviving victim, and the parents of Jacqueline Hill, Barbara Leach and Jane MacDonald looked on, the strain and emotion clear on their faces. One by one, the 12 other charges were read out. Each time the verdict was murder. Each time the majority 10-2. Immediately, the Attorney General asked that Sutcliffe should be locked up for the rest of his life. Dr. Terence Kay, one of the psychiatrists who'd given evidence, said that in the light of Sutcliffe's illness, he agreed. The judge then turned to Sutcliffe. Peter William Sutcliffe, the jury have found you guilty of 13 charges of murder, and if I may say so, murder of a very cowardly nature. He said he found it difficult to describe the brutality, so he would let the catalogue of crimes speak for themselves. He spoke of the deep fear that Sutcliffe had induced among women over a wide area. Sutcliffe said to the judge, you are an unusually dangerous man, and therefore I recommend an unusually long period of imprisonment. 30 years. But in your case, I hope life will mean exactly that. He added that the 7 other counts of attempted murder would each carry a life sentence. Then the judge told Sutcliffe, "You may go." And Peter William Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, left the dock at the Old Bailey for the last time.
One of the questions causing some public concern is how Sutcliffe succeeded in avoiding capture for the 6 years during which he attacked 20 women. In that time, he was interviewed 9 times by officers investigating the murders, but police, misled by the hoax tape recording with a Geordie accent, let him go. After the verdict, West Yorkshire's Chief Constable, Mr. Ronald Gregory, said there would be an inquiry into the way the investigation had been conducted. After the verdict, Mrs. Doreen Hill, mother of the Ripper's last victim, gave us her reaction. Her daughter Jacqueline would have been 21 today.
I think the jury reached the right verdict. It was exactly what I wanted. It doesn't make me feel any happier. It doesn't bring Jacqueline back. But it was the right one as far as Sutcliffe was concerned.
Are you satisfied with the sentence that he's received?
Well, I would have preferred him to stay in prison for the rest of his life, his natural life.
And if there'd still been capital punishment, would you have hoped that he would have been hung?
I would have, but many people have said they thought hanging was far too good for him.
Would you share that view?
I'd be quite happy to have him hung.
On BBC One at 9:25 there will be a special programme on the background to the Yorkshire Ripper murders.
Following his conviction and incarceration, Sutcliffe chose to use the name Coonan, his mother's maiden name. He began his sentence in 1981. Despite being found sane at his trial, he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. While at Parkhurst, he was seriously assaulted by a 35-year-old career criminal who plunged a broken coffee jar twice into his face, creating 4 wounds requiring 30 stitches. In March '84, Sutcliffe was sent to Broadmoor Hospital under Section 47 of the Mental Health Act. After another attack by a pen to his eye, Sutcliffe lost the vision in his left eye, and his right eye was also severely damaged. Sutcliffe's father died in 2004. In 2005, Sutcliffe was allowed to visit the place where his father's ashes had been scattered. In December 2007, Sutcliffe was again attacked by a fellow inmate who lunged at him with a knife while shouting, "You fucking raping, murdering bastard, I'll blind your fucking other one." Sutcliffe flung himself backwards and the blade missed his right eye, stabbing him in the cheek. In December 2015, Sutcliffe was assessed as being no longer mentally ill and was transferred to HM Prison Frankland in Durham, County Durham.
Before I was on the mission, you know,
Yeah.
I had voices for 2 years, getting good advice when I got depressed. And
What?
Thinking about my grandma was buried in the cemetery where I worked and that, you know. She lived with us, we were very close.
Yeah.
And I blamed myself for her death.
Yeah. Because you used to...
She was coming down the steps and there was we had 2 little kittens, you know, we were playing with them at the bottom of the steps. I was in the kitchen, sat at the table, and I heard a clumping down the steps.
Yeah.
And she was about nearly 80, you know, and a bit unsteady on her feet. And I said, "Grandma, be careful." She was nearly at the bottom. I said, "There's a kitten playing there." And clump, still kept coming down, you know. And she stepped on one, and all blood came out of its mouth, and she killed it, you know.
Was your gran talking to your head was your gran talking to you in your head, or was it God?
No, it wasn't my grandma. No. No, I thought at the time it was God, you know.
Yeah. Well, what did he say?
Oh, all kinds of things, good advice and that, not to get down, and
Yeah.
you weren't responsible for your grandma's death and that, and stop blaming yourself, you know.
Yeah.
But she died about a week after I'd shouted at her, you know.
Yeah.
I never raised my voice to her in my life, you know, but it was a shock when I saw her foot come down on the kitten.
Yeah.
And crush it, and
Was it?
I shouted, "Look, you've killed it," and that. "You've killed the kitten," I shouted at her, you know.
Yeah.
And she never recovered. Over a week or less than 2 weeks later, she died, you know.
Yeah.
No, I tried suicide once when I was outside, long before I was caught, you know.
Yeah.
Long before I'd actually taken anybody's life. I tried to drive my car off Altar Rock, where the Druids used to sacrifice people.
Oh, right, yeah.
In Bingley. There's a big steep rock, and there's all rocks at the bottom where they used to land on them, you know. And I drove my car. I was going to drive over the edge, but it got jammed on a rock sticking up out of the ground.
Yeah.
The car was rocking like a seesaw.
Right.
And I got out and trying to rev it up with my hand on the steering wheel to jump back in again. And it wouldn't grip. And in the end, it took me so long to free the car that I just forgot I just put it out of my mind what I was going to do.
Have you ever thought about it in jail? Or not? Have you ever thought it while you've been inside or anything like that?
No.
Yeah. What do you miss most about being free then?
Oh, I miss... Well, it's not the same now. You can't drive freely here. There's traffic jams and all that. I miss driving, and I miss seaside holidays.
Yeah.
Just the normal things, you know, stroking a dog.
I'm going to ask you something silly now. Do you miss sex then?
Yeah, I certainly do, yeah.
You do?
Yeah. Well, they've just knocked on the door, Hope.
Have they?
A quarter of an hour's up, darling.
All right, then.
Anyway, I'll speak to you again. I don't know when
Sutcliffe died at University Hospital of North Durham, aged 74, on the 13th of November 2020, after having previously returned to HMP Frankland following treatment for a suspected heart attack at the same hospital 2 weeks prior. He had a number of underlying health problems, including diabetes, and had been diagnosed with COVID-19, for which he refused treatment. A private funeral ceremony was held, and Sutcliffe's body was cremated. As always, our thoughts go out to the victims and their loved ones in these heinous and terrible crimes. Perhaps by learning and understanding these horrible events, we can prevent them from happening in the future.